We are continuing a series called Running with the Giants. It's one of the series that I have been so excited to have. I've been wanting to have this for a long time, and I'm so excited that we have this series here today. So what we're going to be talking about is what does it mean to run with the Giants? And what we looked at last week, we looked at a verse in Hebrews that said, hey, it's as though if life is like a race, then those that went before us, it says that, hey, they ran the race before us, and they're in the stands, and they're cheering us on. And we said, hey, what if they could come out of the stands, just one of them, because like if you're in a crowd, you really can't hear the voices, right? And so we said, hey, what if the heroes of the Christian faith or the giants of the Christian faith could come and give you a life lesson based off of their life? They said, hey, if there's one thing I could teach you, what would it be? If it were sports figures and they were in the crowd, let's say, then it would be like if Michael Jordan were to come down and say, hey, I'll teach you about basketball. Or if ODU said, hey, I'll teach you Virginia Tech something about football like they did yesterday. I'm just playing. I forgot to work that in, but I wanted to work it in somehow, so there you go. So. Any Virginia Tech fans don't want to say it today? I'm messing with you. So that's fine. Golf. Tiger Woods, right? If you don't play sports, maybe if you were a musical person, you go, hey, Eddie Van Halen's going to come and show you how to play guitar. I don't know what it would be for you, but think about it like, hey, what would it be like to have some of the greatest people in the world to show you how to do whatever it is you wanted to know? And what we have is we have a Faith Hall of Fame. And it's as though that these people could come out here on the stage today and teach you a life principle that would change your life. And we started last week with talking about Noah, and we said, hey, if he were here, I think he would say one person can make a difference. And today we're going to talk about one of my favorite characters, and his name is David. David was one of the most incredible men in the Bible, and so what I'd like to do to kind of set him up is just tell you a little bit about him. At first, I just want to say, a lot of us are going to say, hey, we know him. Some people in the room, you might say, I don't know all the stories, and that's okay. So we're going to spend some time setting it up, and we want you to feel very comfortable here to say maybe you weren't raised in church, maybe you didn't know all the stories, and that's totally fine. And so sometimes you get lost if you come to a church and they go, hey, remember this person that did this? And you're like, I don't know who that person is. So let me tell you a little bit about him, and you can read about him in the Bible in the books of 1st and 2nd Samuel, in the book of Chronicles, and he's actually mentioned in some other places. He actually wrote a book of the Bible, or a lot of it, in the book of Psalms. He wrote Psalms and things like that. So let me tell you a little bit about him. He was a shepherd boy in ancient times in Israel who later became a warrior. Kind of by accident, he became a warrior who at about age 16, he faced a giant warrior named Goliath, and a lot of people know him from that. He killed Goliath. And later on, he became a warrior. He was a poet. He wrote, like I said, parts of the books of Psalms. And he also later became king of Israel. One of the greatest kings that's ever sat on the throne of Israel is King David. And so today we're going to talk about him and his life lesson. If David were to be here today, I think he would want to tell us something about maybe why God said this about him. In the book of Acts, it says this about David. Acts, you can turn with me if you want, or we're going to put it up here on the screen. Maybe. Acts chapter 13 and verse 22. Acts chapter 13 and verse 22. What I'd like to encourage you to do is this, is we're going to give you some notes today, so if you don't have a handout, make sure you have one, because we're going to give you some very practical things to take with you. But here's what it said about David. It says, after removing Saul, who was the king of Israel, Saul had sinned against God, and God removed Saul, and he put David in. He said he made David their king, and God testified concerning him, David, that I have found David, son of Jesse, a man after my own heart. He will do everything I want him to do. That David was a man after God's own heart. I would say if there's anything that God could say about you, the biggest thing he could ever say is if he said, you are a man after my own heart. That's amazing, isn't it? And today we're going to try to explore, why did he say that? Why did he say that? There's so many amazing qualities of David, but I think if David could come up here and you say, let me ask you a question, David, why did God say that about you? Here's what I think he would say. He'd say, you know what it means to be a man after God's own heart? Here's what it means. Humble yourself before God. In fact, I want you to write it down. Humble yourself before God. The lesson that David would teach is this. And it's a lesson that, quite honestly, I don't know. I'm still trying to figure out exactly what it means, but I believe that it is probably the greatest ingredient that God wants us to have in our life. And it's an area where, I don't know about you, but I don't always like to talk about humility because it's kind of like I don't know that I totally understand it. And sometimes I think, hey, if people would just be strong and courageous. See, David could stand up here today and he could say, hey, look, I was a warrior, and the number one characteristic that you need in life is you need to have courage. But that's not what he would say. You know what the number one characteristic is? You need to have great leadership. No, that's not what he said. You know what you need to do? You need to be as poetic as I am. You need to take life and understand how to put it into poetry and sing songs about it. No, that's not it either. What he would say is this: humble yourself before God. You really got to look at the word humble. I don't know about you. I'd like to be described in many ways, but I don't know that I would like to be described as humble. But today we're going to take a look at why. And by the way, before we get into it, what I want to say is this. If I were to say what I struggle with most in my life, it would be this. If I could say it another way, I would say what you struggle with most in your life, as I look around the room, and I know a lot of you guys, is this. We're made up of a church. Most of us are very entrepreneurial, stick-to-it type people, and we have a lot of great qualities, and I love our church. But I would say, hey, if there's something missing in our lives, this is the ingredient that would be missing. It's like baking a pie that represents your life and leaving the sugar out. And you're going, I just don't know why it doesn't taste right. I'm working hard. I'm doing all this stuff. I got all these other things. And today is not a message of shame. It's a message that says, hey, this is not about shaming you. It's a message that's saying, hey, this is very practical to say, if you had this ingredient, you'll have the power of God in your life. I'll tell you something. You could have all the other qualities, and if you don't have this one, you will not have the power of God in your life. That's not me talking. The Bible as a whole says it, and today we're going to take a look at this. So here's what I want to do. We're going to make this very simple today. We're going to define what humility is, because without a definition, it's kind of hard to understand. It's like, hey, what is this thing? What is it? What isn't it? Then we're going to take a look at some snapshots from the life of David and say, here's how he demonstrated it. And then finally, we're going to come back, and I'm going to give you a practical test to take with you. The good news is today you could start the process to be humble. The bad news is you can't be humble today. Okay, it's like exercise. And by the way, here's the problem with it is once you obtain it, it doesn't mean you'll keep it. It's kind of like getting a great body. Like if you look at my body, you say, hey, I want to be like, no, I'm just playing. I don't think anybody, you have to laugh that hard. Good night. But if you said, hey, if we brought in a bodybuilder and you said, hey, you bodybuild and you exercise, if you stop doing it, will you continue to have this great physique? No, you won't. By the way, if you don't continue to exercise it, you can be a so-called mature Christian and struggle with this. And instead of God blessing your life, it's as though God is fighting against your life. And for some of you guys, you've been feeling it for some time. You've been wondering, what's missing? Because I feel like I'm doing all the right stuff, but I don't seem to have any traction. And the truth is what might be missing from your life is humbling yourself before God. Okay, you ready? What's the definition of humble? So let's get into it. The definition of humble is this. I looked it up, and I got this from Google, so it's online, so it's got to be true. Okay. I'll just play it. Humility means this. To be humble means this. Not proud or arrogant. To be modest. To be courteously respectful. You can write that in the margin if you want to. What we didn't pick up on is humble, because there's different definitions of humble. What we're not talking about when we talk about humble, or what it's talking about in the Bible to humble yourself, it doesn't mean a person that thinks lower than themselves than they should be. That's not what it means. That's another part of it. Humiliation is another form of humble, the word, and we can get very confused by it that says, hey, a humble person can't have confidence, and we'll take a look at that. That the reason why sometimes we don't like the word humble is we really don't understand it. I think as we start to look at David's life, we'll see it. But it's super important that you understand that humble means I'm not proud or arrogant. I'm modest, which means I actually see myself the way I am. I'm not trying to put on. I'm not trying to impress. And that I'm courteously respectful. I got to tell you, if there's something missing in the world today, it's this: courteously respectful. Can I say it another way? If there's something missing in the church today, if there's something even missing in our church in some ways, courteously respectful. And I'll explain what I mean by that in a minute. Okay, so let's take a look at some snapshots from the life of David. Some snapshots from the life of David. The first place we're going to start is in 1 Samuel chapter 17. You can read about David's life in 1 Samuel 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, 1 Chronicles, and then read some of the Psalms. So 1 Samuel 17, we pick up in David's life, and the snapshot that I want you to see, here's the caption on the snapshot, just so you can see it, is this, that David was humble by being confident in God, not self. So David faced something in his life in 1 Samuel chapter 17, and I'm not going to get into every detail of it, but I'll let you read it for yourself. And what he faced was this, is as a 16-year-old boy, he had already been anointed king. The current king of Israel had sinned against God, and he was looking for another king. And so he sent Samuel the prophet to David, and he anointed him king. And then Samuel left, and nothing happened. Okay? And David went back to being a shepherd boy. That was where he was at. Okay, that was weird, right? I mean, Samuel just basically showed up at his house, looked for somebody. God said, it's David. He anointed David, and he left. And David had many other brothers, and he was the youngest, and he was kind of forgotten, and he might not even been the highest achiever in the family kind of thing. And then we find David, the next piece we find is right here, is that David goes to give his brother some food on the battlefield, that the Philistines had come. Anytime your king is living in sin, or your king has some chinks in his armor, the enemies will naturally do that. I don't know if you ever had that at work, where it's like, hey, if I'm down, guess what? All my enemies are now jockeying for my position. That's what happens. And so the Philistines, the Israel's natural enemy, came and were fighting them, and they weren't really winning. And they were kind of afraid of him. And then finally, a giant warrior by the name of Goliath comes out. Maybe you've heard of him. He's about 8 foot tall, literally. A warrior since the time he was a child. And he threatened him. And he basically said, hey, I'll be the champion for Philistines, and you send your champion out to me. Is it going to be your king? And the king's afraid, right? Because he don't have the power of God on his life. And so they're basically hiding from this guy. And every day he would come out and taunt them. And David came just to bring food to his brothers. And he had never been in a battle before in his life. And he hears the Philistine and he said, hey, how come somebody doesn't do something about that? Now, I don't know about you, but what that tells me is young and dumb, right? I mean, it's like, why don't somebody do something? And they basically were like, why don't you do something about it? He goes, all right, fine, I'll fight him. And you're thinking, really young and dumb, right? I mean, like, do you know who this guy is? This guy's been a warrior since he was a little kid, younger than you. He's been killing people since he was a little kid. I mean, I know it sounds horrible, but it's the truth. The most scary thing in anybody, and if you're in the military and you've been in combat, and you'll understand this, because I've read about it. I've never been in combat, but I do understand this part of it. The most scary thing for anybody is the professional soldier that's been there before. He's been there. His life experience. If you lean into this guy's life experience, you would say he's killed not thousands of people, but tens of thousands of people. And not only has he killed tens of thousands of people, he didn't do it from a distance. He did it up close and personal. You could smell his breath when he killed you. You get it? And you're about to face him as a champion. You don't know what you're talking about, boy. This guy has killed more people than you've seen in your lifetime, David. And you're going to go out and face him? You know what that sounds like? That sounds like arrogance, doesn't it? Until we get to what happens. So David goes out to face the giant. They say, David, why don't you put on some armor, right? He can't find any armor to fit him. He doesn't even know how to use armor. This is going to be a problem, right? You have a slingshot from your farm, and he has a sword and a javelin. And the giant sees him. You can read about it in 1 Samuel, and he says, he taunts him. I'm going to kill you. I'm going to feed your body to the birds. I'm not making up anything. This is in the Bible. Maybe you didn't know that. Now you might want to read it. It's a really incredible story. I mean, this is a fight. And the giant comes out there, and he's like, what are y'all sending me? You're sending me this little boy. I'm going to break him in two. I'll drink your blood and feed your rest of your body to the birds. I'm not making this up. This is really in the Bible. It's graphic, isn't it? Here's how David responds. 1 Samuel chapter 17. Go back one. Can you go back one? Sorry. 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 45. David said to the Philistines, you come against me with sword and spear and javelin. But I come against you in the name of the Lord God Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defiled. He goes on to say this in verse 46. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands. Then he says a whole bunch of other stuff like, I'm going to cut off your head and I'm going to feed your body to the birds. Okay. Okay. And the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. He says one more thing. We'll skip down to verse 47, I think. At the end of verse 47, he says, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give all of you into our hands. What I want you to see is David faced the greatest moment of his life, and it wasn't just by dumb arrogance that he faced the moment. This is important. But he is a model, and he is a man after God's own heart, because he would say, my confidence wasn't because I was a great warrior. I didn't lean into my confidence. I leaned into God. And by the way, he killed the giant with a sling, with a stone. A single stone hit him in the head and killed him. Now, I don't know if you know how incredible that is. That doesn't happen. Right? You can't teach somebody how to kill a giant with a sling. It doesn't happen that way. They have armor. It was God. And that's the source of his strength. That David did not have confidence in himself. He had confidence in God. And if David were here, he'd say, hey, I'm a man after God's own heart, not because I had courage to face the giant. I'm a man after God's own heart, not because of my courage, because I had placed my faith and trust in God. I humbled myself before God. And you know what he did? He lifted me up and I killed the giant. You're facing life's giants. Be careful not to lean too hard into your own experience. If you start saying things the way I see it, what I need is this, what I need is this. You see, it's not what you need, it's who you need. You need to humble yourself before God. That's a piece of it. You understand what we're saying today? That's a snapshot into the life of David. Okay, the second snapshot is this. We're going to fast forward in David's life. David kills the giant. He becomes the hero in Israel. You can't imagine what it was like for a 16-year-old boy to kill a giant and to come back to the town. And it says, it's kind of gross, he cut off the head and brought the head back with him. That's a 16-year-old for you. But he comes back, a hero. And they start singing songs, and you know what they say? They say, Saul, the king, the current king, has killed his thousands. He kind of liked that. Then they said, but David has killed his tens of thousands. Think the king liked that? No. God is raising up one, and the other one is turning his back on God. But see, the problem with King Saul is that Saul started off really well. But the problem with Saul is that he would confess and confess and confess his sins to God. You will see that. But he never repented. And he held on to jealousy and anger for David. And eventually that anger and that jealousy was dangerous. Be careful of the leader that is insecure. They will make your worst nightmares come true. And so the insecure leader, you know what he does? He vilifies David and he runs David off and he threatens David's life. And David has to run. And you find David later, years later, after he killed the Goliath, you know where he had to run to? He had to run to the land of the Philistines. The very place that he had killed his tens of thousands, supposedly, and now he's living in the land of the Philistines, hiding in a cave. That's where he finds himself. You know, that's a place you can become kind of bitter. Has anybody ever had that? Where it's like, I was doing all this, and I was doing all this great stuff for God. I was living my life, and it was going really well, but now it's not going so well. And the reason is, the reason why my life isn't going well is because of this mean king, and he's got a villain to blame in his life. But this is something we got to grasp, or we're never going to get ahead in life as long as we're playing the blame game. And so, by the way, here's what happens. The king isn't good enough. It's not good enough just to leave him in the hills. You know what he wants? I want him dead. And it was like insanity that took over the king. Envy will do that to you, if you didn't know. It's a whole lesson for another day. But as the king comes after him in the hills of Adullam, he doesn't find David. David hides, and David has all these warriors with him. And the king falls asleep with his men. And David comes at nighttime. You'll find him in the king. It's happened twice. And as David sees the king, he has the opportunity to kill him. In fact, his men go, here's King Saul. God has finally delivered him into your hands, David. And he wakes Saul up. And he says this to him, 1 Samuel chapter 24 and verse 10. He says, this day you have seen with your own eyes, he's talking to Saul, how the Lord delivered you into my hands in the cave. Some urged me to kill you, but I spared you. I said, I will not lay my hand on my Lord, because he is the Lord's anointed. David would say, the reason I'm a man after God's own heart is that when I was done wrong, when I was in the right, I didn't do wrong to the person that did me wrong. Does that make sense? I was humbled by doing the right thing even when I was done wrong. And I'll tell you something, this is something we have to lean into, because if there is an area of struggle that I see, And the reason why I would say, I would almost struggle to say, is our church have a problem with humility? I would say, no, we don't have a problem with humility. As long as people are doing right to us, we're fine. We're not mean, arrogant people. That's not us. But if you let somebody do you wrong, entrepreneur, right? And we're going to bristle up. We're American. We don't go for that, right? You do us wrong, and you're going to hear from us, right? And I've heard this 1,000 times even in church. We have to fight fire with fire. Be careful with that. Because I'm here to tell you today, if you do, maybe it shouldn't say if you do, when we do, including me. When we treat people and don't care how we treat people that have wronged us, and we go, but that's what they did to us, so I'm going to do it to them. They would have done it to me, so it doesn't matter how I treat them. The power of God will be removed from your life. Maybe you didn't know it. Maybe it has been removed from your life and you didn't know why. Now you're going to understand why. We can't continue to blame. You see, David understood something. He humbled himself, not before his enemy. He humbled himself before God. God, this person has done me wrong. You're right. But I'm going to let you deal with it, God, because David's source wasn't what this person said. You see, the problem for most of us is we're so angry because somebody did something that hurt us, and our focus is on that person, and God is saying, I want you to focus on me. That's the only way humility works. I want to give you just a verse of Scripture just to take with you because I know a lot of us are struggling with this. You see, our eyes have to be on God, but the part that I want us to be the most careful about is this, is those that are in authority. Those that have abused authority. Does anyone here today, and I'm not asking for your party affiliation, have a problem with anybody in the government? If I were to look at your Facebook page, would I see a rant that said, hey, this is what I think about these guys, right? And I'm going to challenge you today just to look at this, okay? I'm not saying it, and I won't even read the scriptures because if I do, you're just going to want to argue with me about them because that's how we are, right? But I want you to write these scriptures down if that's you. Matthew 22, verse 21. See what Jesus says about those that are in authority. Romans chapter 13. See what the Apostle Paul wrote about those in authority. 1 Timothy chapter 2. 1 Peter chapter 12. I took time to read these scriptures out and to say them so you can study them if you're really serious about knowing. But I will tell you this. Here's the bad turn that I see the church take. And I think the reason why the power of God is being taken off of the church today and possibly even off of our church today is because we have a problem with humility that says it doesn't matter how I treat somebody that's wronged me, and you couldn't be more wrong. You couldn't be more wrong. Fighting fire with fire. David didn't do it. And I'm telling you, he had every reason to hate this man. This man ran him off. David was anointed king, and 20 years later, he still wasn't king. 20 years later, he was living in the Philistines. 20 years later, he had to be a mercenary for the Philistines. And he could have said, that's Saul's fault. I have every right to fight you. And God delivered you in my hands. How many people would say, if that person was there, I'd kill him, right? And God is saying, honor those that are in authority over you. Respect those. Pray for those that are in authority. He never stopped praying for King Saul. Did you know that? To the day Saul died. And when Saul died, he mourned the death of King Saul. And David will be here today to say, you know what made me a man after God's own heart? Because I humbled myself by doing the right thing even when I was done wrong. Be careful with that. I'm telling you, somebody today that's blocking your path. You have all the qualities of a great Christian leader, but your problem is this, is when you're done wrong, you go off the handle. You get the idea? And God, he might be calling you out today. I understand. And I understand it's painful, but here's what I know. If we don't say it, the problem is this, it's like baking the pie. You're missing an ingredient. But if you'll get this, God's power will come on your life in a mighty way. It doesn't mean you're lost. It doesn't mean there's not hope. It means that, hey, grasp this principle that, hey, when this happens, maybe I need to rethink this. Maybe I need to get some help for this. I know it's going to be a struggle to work through some of this, okay? Here's the third snapshot. This is one I struggle with too sometimes. David was humbled by embracing God's plan after God said no to his plan. Ooh. He humbly embraced God's plan when God said no to his plan. So David later became king of Israel. Saul died. David became king, and there's a whole thing about how he became king. It was huge, and it took him a long time. And then finally, he was firmly in place. And when he became king, the children of Israel loved David more than any other king in Israel. He was amazing. In fact, they say David was like an angel of God. That's how they compared him. He had so much popularity. But he decided that, hey, what I want to do is, instead of just investing in me, I see I have a big palace. And he looked around and he said, what good thing could I do? And he said, hey, God's house, when you go to worship God, they're worshiping God in a tent that they took from Egypt. And what I think we ought to do is, I think we ought to build a temple for God just as big as my palace. That's what I think I ought to do. So he goes to the prophet Nathan, and he says, Nathan, what do you think? That's smart, isn't it? You know what David didn't do? He didn't just go do it. He asked advice. That's big. It means David was teachable. And he said, what do you think I ought to do? And Nathan, being a prophet of God, said, it sounds great. Go do it. And before he left, the word of the Lord came to Nathan and said, no, I don't think David should do it. And here's why. 1 Chronicles chapter 22. I told you this is just snapshots. You need to get back. There you go. 1 Chronicles chapter 22 and verse 7. He said, I had it in my heart to build a house for the name of the Lord my God. But this word of the Lord came to me. Here's the reason why I don't want you to build it. You have shed much blood and have fought many wars. You are not to build my house for my name, because you have shed much blood on the earth in my sight. What? I don't know about you, but that really rubs me the wrong way. Right? I mean, I know it's God, so I can't correct that. But that just don't sound right, does it? I mean, have you ever had a moment in your life like that where it's like, God, you asked me to do this, and now that I did this, you're punishing me for it? Right? I mean, do you know what I live like? Do you know how much post-traumatic stress that David had as king by age 30, by age 40? How many people he had killed, how many dreams that he had at nighttime, how much he struggled with this. And I did it because you asked me to do it, and now you hold it against me? You know why I'm saying it that way? Because I think there's somebody here that's exactly how you feel. And you go, I would serve God, but God said no. And after everything I've done, right? David was humble because he embraced God's plan, even after God said no to his. God said, no, you're not the right person to do it. I want to show you what David did because it's a model for how to be humble. 2 Samuel chapter 7, this parallels with Chronicles. 2 Samuel chapter 7 and verse 18, then David went and he sat before the Lord and he just threw out all of his complaints. No. David sat before the Lord and he said, who am I, sovereign Lord? And what is my family that you have brought me this far? You see, David had not just an attitude of gratitude, he had a habit of gratitude in his life. He said, hey, you know what I've learned? It's about you, God. And yeah, you said no to this, but here's the thing. That's okay. Because I know the great plan that you have for my family. And just because you said no in one area, that doesn't mean, he didn't back off. Somebody here today, you're struggling because God said no to an area of your life, but that doesn't mean God doesn't want you doing anything. It just meant he said no to that. And David humbles himself before God and he says, hey, that's okay. That's all right that you say no to me. And here's what David did. I want to show you, not only did he say it, but here's what he did. 1 Chronicles, we'll go back to Chronicles, it says this. 1 Chronicles chapter 22 and verse 5, this is at the end of David's life. He says, therefore, I will make preparations for it. He's remembering back to the time that God said no to him. And he's saying, here's what I did. I said, hey, what I'll do is, if I can't do it, then I'll help somebody else do it. Because I know God wants a temple, it's just not me. You see, that's different than Saul. If it can't be me, fine, I'm just going to take my toys and go home, right? If I can't do it, if it can't be my name, if I can't be up front, then I can't empower somebody else. But David was about God. See, that's what I mean, humbling himself before God. But this doesn't do anything for your name. Most people don't even realize, what part did David have in the temple? Can I tell you what he did? He made extensive preparations. In another place it says this, when Solomon, his son, got ready to take the throne, he said, hey, Solomon, everything, all the material for the temple is here. Most people don't know that. It's Solomon's temple, right? Because Solomon was rich and wealthy. Solomon didn't provide any material for the temple. You know why? Because David made all the preparations for the temple. You know why he did it? Because he's humble. He's humble. Because when God says no to his plan, he embraced God's plan. Does that make sense? I might not be the right one. He got over self. You see, there's too much self-promotion in ministry, and that's why the power of God is missing. And by the way, it went on to be the greatest temple in the history of mankind. Did you know that? They still talk about it today. Solomon's temple is the greatest temple that's ever sat on the mountain, the holy mountain of Israel. It's compared to the day that Jesus Christ will return himself. All the material was provided by David because he humbled himself. He didn't get mad. He didn't place blame. He embraced what God had to do in his life. That's just a snapshot. Here's the last snapshot I want you to see. 2 Samuel chapter 12 and verse 3. I've been reading this in my quiet time, and I've been struggling through the life of David. When you hear about what I'm about to say, many of you know the story. Some of you guys don't know the story. And if you don't know the story, when I'm about to say, you're going to wrestle with it like I am. David made a mistake in his life. Huge mistake. At age 50, when he was known for being such a great man of God, there's a warning in this for somebody that says, be careful to think of yourself as so-called mature. Don't think you can't fall at the end. Don't think you can't fall in the middle. When you reach a level of success, don't think, hey, lean hard into your experience, because if you do, you might find yourself in the same place as David. David was up on the roof one night, and he looks out, and I don't know why. Maybe he woke up from a nightmare from trauma that the man had. He probably had a lot of trauma. He had done a lot of things. He had seen a lot of things. He struggled with a lot of things. David struggled sexually. That's not to be funny. He really did. And when you see the way he lived his life, he had uncontrolled passion in certain areas. And I believe it was a coping skill. It's how he relaxed himself. And he goes out on the roof and he sees this woman that's taking a bath. And ironically enough, her name is Bathsheba. I don't know. Anyway, sorry. It's not funny, but I don't know. It's just weird to me. Her name is Bathsheba. And he invites her to the palace and they have an affair, one night affair. And she leaves. And he doesn't do anything with it until she calls back to say, hey, by the way, after that one night, I got pregnant. You got to be kidding, right? I tell you what, we'll cover it up. So he calls her husband back from the battlefield because her husband was out fighting the battle while David's home in his palace, right? He's supposed to be out on the battlefield, but he's there home in the palace trying to relax, I guess. And he calls him home and says, hey, why don't you go home to your wife? And he goes, oh, no, I can't do that. Right? I can't do that. All my friends are in the battle. I won't go home and be with my wife while they're out in the battlefield. And that kind of spurns David. And he's like, okay, fine, no problem. I'll send you back to the battlefield like you asked. And he sends to his commander, Joab, who he's really good friends with. He says, hey, maybe you know what I'm talking about, right? All I want you to do is just let this guy get a little close to the battle line. That's all I'm asking. If he dies, it's not the end of the world. I mean, but there are sacrifices that happen in war. And this guy dies. Nobody knew about it. He later on marries, after the time of mourning, he marries Bathsheba. And she comes into the palace, and they're about to have their son when the prophet Nathan comes to David. He thinks he's covered it up for the good of Israel. Hey, I made a mistake, but I made it right, and one man died for the nation, and nobody really needs to know because this is going to hurt everybody. Nobody needs to know this, right? I just confessed my sins to God. Nobody else needs to know. That's kind of the thought, right? Until Nathan, the prophet, comes and says, there's a problem. What you think you did in secret, all of Israel's going to know. He tells him a story, and then he says, by the way, David, you're the man. You're the man, and he points him out. He points him out hard. And God is going to judge you for what you did. This is where I struggle to go, how could David be a man after God's own heart, right? I want you to think about this for a minute. How could David be a man after God's own heart, right? Because, why? Because Saul was not a man after God's own heart, and Saul didn't sin as bad as David. Can I tell you why David is a man after God's own heart? Because after he said that, after Nathan the prophet said it, here was David's response. Then David said to Nathan, I have sinned against the Lord. You know why he's a man after God's own heart? Not because he didn't make mistakes. He made a lot of them. And after this, not because there wasn't consequences in his life, because if you look at his family became extremely dysfunctional after this. Unbelievable. What happened in the life of David is horrible. He lost a son, another son over this. Terrible stuff that happened in the life of David. But it's because he confessed his sin to God. He admitted, he humbled himself before God and admitted that he sinned. David was an incredible man. And I think if he were here today, he'd say, hey, guys, I'm not a man after God's own heart because I'm perfect. I'm not a man after God's own heart because I was the perfect family man, because I wasn't. I'm not a man after God's own heart because I was courageous or natural-born leader or I could write psalms or I could perform. No, I'm a man after God's own heart only for one reason, because I learned a principle to humble myself before God. I think it's a missing ingredient for some of us. And I just want to get practical just for a minute, and then I'll get you out of here. I want to give you 5 things today. I want to share one verse of Scripture, and I want to share with you 5 things that I think could help us today, okay? The Scripture is this. It's 2 Peter And I just want to show it to you so you don't think, hey, you're just pulling a lot out of David's life. Is that really a principle? But here's what Peter teaches in 2 Peter chapter 5, verse 5. This is a letter to the church. He says, all of you clothe yourselves with humility towards one another, because God opposes the proud, but he shows favor to the humble. Humble yourself, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, that he may lift you up in due time. So can I give you the principle? God opposes the proud, but he shows favor to the humble. God's power is with the humble, not the prideful. Can I say it really plain? If you're prideful, you will not have the power of God. If you look at the things that David did in his life and you go, yeah, I hear what you're saying, but yeah, I fight fire with fire, you won't have the power of God in your life. If you don't care how you treat people, you won't have the power of God in your life. In fact, it won't just be that you don't have the power of God, God will actively oppose you. And somebody here today, that's exactly where you are. You're wondering why God's hammer is coming at you. And it's not because you're not a good person. It's not because you don't try hard. You have one flaw and one flaw alone that's keeping you from the power of God in your life. In fact, God is not just not giving you his power, he's opposing you, and you don't know why. And the reason is because you've never humbled yourself before him. But if you will, he will lift you up. Does that make sense? You can change the tide. You can change this today. The hard news is that it's just like exercise. It's going to take you time. And the so-called mature Christian in the room, you might be struggling worse because you had it at one time, but you're like King Saul, and now you don't. And instead of embracing God, you're fighting it, and you're making excuses for it, and you're blaming for it. And the only thing God is saying is he's going, hey, do what David did. Don't do what King Saul did. Stop blaming and humble yourself before God. So I'm going to give you 5 things to take home as a test, okay? You just take them, and you'll need to pull this out and kind of say, hey, do I struggle? Am I struggling with this? If you are, just be honest with it, okay? Ask some people. Take this list out and go, I think I struggle with this. Or take your list out and ask some people that are mature Christians in your life and say, hey, which areas do I struggle with? And don't say a word, okay? Listen to the feedback without saying it, because the reason why they're not going to want to say anything is because they know what's coming next. If you're not humble, let me tell you what you're going to do. You're going to make all the excuses why I don't struggle with that. No, I don't do that. Don't say anything. Just listen to the feedback, okay? So here it is. Here's the test, okay? It's going to be like this. The prideful do this. The humble do this. All right, you ready? The prideful feel entitled. Number 1. The prideful feel entitled. The humble never lose gratitude. The two go hand in hand. The hard part with this, including my life, is I would never admit that I feel entitled. But after thinking about it, sometimes we do. Here's the test for you on it, and I wrote this down so I wouldn't forget. The test is this. Do you complain or are you grateful? If you're in circumstances and you're going, I would be grateful, but, then I can tell you that's a problem. And obviously Satan doesn't want you to have this. That's why we're having technical problems. No problem. We don't need technology to do this, okay? Here's what I want to say. If you're complaining, no matter what your circumstances, you're being prideful. That's hard, isn't it? Because here's what I know about God. God doesn't want to just change your circumstances. God wants to change your perspective, because your perspective is more important than your circumstances. Did you know that? Let me say that again. Your perspective is more important than your circumstances. The way I know that is this. I prayed this morning. I said, God, if you give me $1 million, it would solve a lot of my problems. And then I thought about some millionaires I know, and I realized it didn't solve their problems. God gave you enough of what you need. Humble yourself before God, and he will lift you up when? In due time, in his time. Make sense? Okay. That's number 1. Number 2, the prideful take the high place, the humble take the low place. The prideful take the high place, the humble take the low place. The prideful are always looking ways to impress other people. The prideful are always looking, I want the most prestigious place. And if we're trying to minister to people, what God is saying is, no, you got to take the low place and then be offered the high place. But don't let your eyes get on the high place. Too many of us are doing that. The prize for it, the credit for it. Just like David, David didn't build the temple, but he provided the material. A lot of people can't do that because I have to have my name on it. I have to have my plaque on it. I have to have my name on the seat. I have to do my thing, or else I don't want to be involved in it if it doesn't have to do with me. Jesus, you can write this verse down, Luke 14:10, just write that under there and you can look at it. Jesus said, hey, when you're invited to a banquet, do you take the best seat at the table or do you take the lowest seat at the table? He said, here's a great people lesson. If you take the low place and they want you at the high place, let them ask you and they'll even think more of you. But if you continue to promote self and promote self and promote self, it's not going to help you in life. Okay, number 3. The prideful close the notebook. The humble keep the notebook open. What I mean? The humble are teachable. The prideful are not. The prideful think they already know. And this is why maturity is going to be so hard, because you come to a place where you start to think, hey, I know about life, and I lean into my experience, and I know more than everybody else. And we're not telling you to be stupid and listen to foolish people and stuff like that. But what we're saying is, at what point is it that you can no longer learn and I already know everything? If that's you, right? When's the last time you learned something? When's the last time you didn't have to say your piece on it? When's the last time you could even let them say something and go, hey, let's just kind of wrestle through this, but I don't need to say what I'm thinking yet, because I need to hear your opinion. I need to learn. Let me ask you a question. Who can't you learn from? Who is it that's younger that you're thinking, hey, I know more than everybody, right? I'm the smartest person, and now nobody can talk to the smartest person, right? Be a learner, not an expert. When you become the expert and you go, I'm the expert in the room, and then I don't need anybody to speak into my life because I know everything, then you can no longer learn. But as long as you're a learner, if you humble yourself, then God can lift you up. That's the reason why he says that, because he goes, hey, if you are the prideful and you already know everything, I can't teach you anything, right? Because you're not teachable. Do you still have the notebook open? Ask yourself. Ask somebody close to you. Ask your spouse. Do I still have that? No, don't ask your spouse. You're not ready for that. Okay. Do I still have the notebook open, or do I have it closed? Have I already made up my mind? Do I go in the room, I already have all the answers, so I don't even need to hear what you got to say because I already know everything? Is that us? Or are we humble? Okay. Number 4, the prideful light the spotlight. The humble push other people into the spotlight. A good test would be is if you're on social media, how many selfies do you take? You know, I've been learning. I like to take pictures of myself. No, I'm just playing. I like to mark, hey, I was there with somebody else. Pull some other people into the picture with you. You know how much that means? I know how much it means to me if a pastor, you know, like Jeff Cabusta, there's a picture of me and him, or Dino Rizzio, different ones that I've been around, and we will take a selfie together. It's called a Ussie. It's awesome, right? Do that for some people in their life. You have no idea what that means. Hey, I was with you. Bring them into the spotlight. Or is it always all about you? Oh, no, I don't do that. I only get around the people that I like and all that. You see, the thing I want you to see about that is this, the spotlight. Insecure leaders cannot do that. If you're always self-promoting, you need to ask yourself, you got a problem with insecurity. And to overcome insecurity is very simple. You got to change your source from what it is you think you need, because you think, hey, if I got this, then I would finally be happy. If I got this, then it would be. But I feel like everything's being taken from me, right? They might get credit, and I might be abandoned. What is at the end of that insecurity for you? I can tell you what it was for King Saul. He thought, hey, if I were to give credit to somebody else, if I were to promote David, then they won't love me anymore, and I'll be all alone, and my legacy will mean nothing. By the way, the opposite is true. The more you try to hold on, the less it gets. You see, Jesus had it right. He said, look, I came to give life, and I came to give it to the full. And the problem with us is this, is the reason why we stop being humble oftentimes is a fear that drives our insecurity, which is a scarcity mentality. You see, when we have a scarcity mentality, it means there's only so many resources in the world, and we have to grasp for them, right? I know, my father-in-law is a survivalist, so I know a little bit about it, right? Don't come take my stuff, I'm going to kill you, right? I got my supplies, I'll protect my bag of rice. I get it. But you know, I'm joking about him. He's an awesome person. He helps a lot of people. But I'm not joking about this part. When you have a scarcity mentality, you can't help anybody. It's so important. When you have a scarcity mentality, I'll be clear, you don't know God. Because Jesus said, I came to give life and to give it to the full. You cannot be jealous and envious and insecure if you have a right relationship with God. And the way it takes is this, but God, you don't understand they did this to me. You don't understand they did that to me. You don't understand they're going to take this from me. You don't know my circumstances. You don't know this. You don't know this. And you're going, hey, it's all about what is happening and what I need and what. And it's not what you need, it's who you need. And the day you get your eyes off of your circumstances and you get them onto God, your insecurity will go away. You won't have insecurity anymore because you know what? Jesus Christ is enough. What is Jesus Christ not enough for? The blood and the resurrection of Jesus Christ is enough for anything you have in your life. You see, if you humble yourself before God, He will lift you up in due time. It's not what you need. You see, that's the problem. See, too many people are waiting for, change my circumstances, do this thing. I need this, I need this, I need this. No, you don't need this. You need God. And if you'll humble yourself, see? And a great test is, are you always getting in the spotlight? Take it from somebody who likes the spotlight. Why? Why do you like the spotlight so much? Is it to lift God up? Do you use your platform to lift God up? Or are you lifting yourself up? Lifting yourself up, that's a loser, man, I'm telling you. Don't do it. David would tell you today, he'd stand here, he'd say, I had the biggest platform in the world. But let me tell you something. Nothing is worth what God did in my life. I'm telling you. It will change your whole world, okay? Number five. You guys got to listen faster. The prideful address before confess. You know what I'm talking about? It's not that they won't confess their sins, but it is a real struggle, is it not? You ever been to a prideful person? Everybody's sitting real still. You know anybody like that? Your spouse maybe like that? If I say one thing about them, then you set it off in them. You know what I'm talking about? No, I don't do that. No, you do that. No. The reason why this happened was because you did blah, 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 right? I mean, it's like they turn it. They never confess. They're always addressing, right? They address your problem. No, that's your problem. No, I don't do anything. I don't have that, right? But the humble, they confess their own sins before addressing the sins in others. I'm going to tell you, if we get that, more people would listen to us. Did you know that? If somebody has a problem with you and you would sit and listen to what they have to say first and not say anything, not blame, not make excuses, but listen to what they have to say, it doesn't mean you agree with them. By the way, you can listen to somebody without agreeing with them. Did you know that? I think this is a problem we have with some of the political stuff. We think by not saying something it means we agree with them. No, it doesn't. You can listen to somebody without agreeing. You can be respectful of somebody without agreeing. This is big. You can be courteously respectful. And if we did, we have a chance to change things. The problem I see is, I don't know if you ever watch the news or you watch political stuff, but I have to turn it off at some point because I go, no one is listening. Everybody's talking and nobody's listening. Have you ever seen the talking heads where they just all start talking at once? And you're like, how does this solve the problem? Can I tell you? It doesn't. Confess your own sins. I'm telling you, humble is the way. And if we were to humble ourselves, can I tell you what God would do? He'll lift us up. Where do you need to be lifted up? Can I tell you what the key is? Humble yourself. The key to the life of King David, if David were here today, he'd say, you know what, all the other stuff, can I tell you what the key is? Humbling myself before God. He said, I don't even know how important it was, man. You know who came through my lineage? Jesus Christ himself. Nobody's affected the world more than King David, I'm telling you. But he goes, it's not about me, it's about God. Can I tell you something? God wants to do the same thing in your life. Pride will keep you from God. If you don't believe that, maybe make an appointment with the devil and he'll tell you about it. Right? Pride's what separated him from God. Pride's what will separate you from God. But if you'll humble yourself, God will forgive you. If you'll humble yourself, God will come into your life. If you say, hey, I've already done that, but you started to get pride back in your life and it's separating the relationship you have with God. Maybe you're saved, but you're not close. You don't have the power of God in your life. But if you were to take the time and you take these 5 things, and these aren't the only things, okay? This is my list. You can make your own list. Maybe you got some better things to go on the list. But if you were to start here with these 5 things and you were to address it and say, hey, how am I doing with this? I got a feeling that if you were to do this, I have no doubt that God will empower your life. I have no doubt the thing that's missing in your life, the thing that you need so desperately, God will do more than you can think or dream or ask. He'll change your whole perspective of life if you'll embrace this. It means we have to slow down, evaluate, and embrace God. And if we'll humble ourselves before God, you have no idea what God could do in our lives. Does that make sense? Let's stand for prayer.